There is a moment in every war when the outcome could have gone differently. A single decision, a single day, a single order that, if reversed, would have changed everything that followed. Military historians spend careers identifying these moments. Most of the time, they are subtle: a missed communication, a delayed reinforcement, a commander who hesitated for an hour too long. The moment in the Greco-Turkish War is not subtle. In the summer of 1921, the Greek army of Asia Minor stood at the Sakarya River in central Anatolia. Behind them lay hundreds of miles of conquered territory. Ahead of them, within striking distance, lay Ankara, the capital of Mustafa Kemal's nationalist movement, the political and military heart of the force that Greece had been fighting for 2 years. If Ankara fell, Kemal's government collapsed. If Kemal's government collapsed, the war ended. If the war ended there, in the summer of 1921, Greece won. The city of Smyrna would never burn. The 3,000 years of Greek civilization in Asia Minor that ended in 9 days in September 1922 would not end. The 1.5 million Greeks expelled from their homes in the population exchange that followed would go home to their families instead. None of that happened, because of what was decided in the summer of 1921. This is the story of how Greece stood at the edge of victory, and what happened next. To understand what the Greek army was doing in the middle of Anatolia in 1921, you need to go back to May 1919. On May 15th, 1919, Greek forces land at Smyrna. They come with the authorization of Britain, France, and the United States. But the reason for that authorization is more cynical than it appears on the surface. The Big Three are not acting out of generosity toward Greece. They are acting out of fear that Italy is about to seize Smyrna for itself. The Greeks are being used as a proxy to block Italian ambitions in the region. It explains something that becomes tragically clear later: why Italy, and then France, abandoned Greece so quickly once the immediate threat of Italian expansion is contained. Greece was a tool, not a partner. The Greek Prime Minister, Eleftherios Venizelos, has spent months at the Paris Peace Conference constructing the diplomatic framework that makes this landing possible. He has negotiated brilliantly. He has played the great powers against each other with a precision that earns him the grudging admiration even of the men he is negotiating against. The landing itself is chaotic and bloody. Greek soldiers march through the streets of Smyrna to the cheers of the Greek population. But in the confusion, shooting breaks out. Turkish civilians and soldiers are killed. The incident poisons the political atmosphere from the first day and gives Mustafa Kemal exactly the narrative he needs to build his nationalist movement: that the Greeks have come not to administer, but to conquer, not to protect the Greek population of Anatolia, but to reclaim territory that Turkey will never voluntarily surrender. Kemal is a general who distinguished himself at Gallipoli, who watched the Ottoman Empire dismembered at the Paris Peace Conference, and who has decided with absolute clarity that the terms imposed on Turkey are terms he does not intend to honor. He retreats to the Anatolian interior. He builds, he organizes, he waits. The Greek army expands its zone of control through 1919 and 1920. The front lines push eastward from Smyrna into the Anatolian plateau. The fighting is constant and draining. Not the set-piece battles of the Western Front, but the grinding, irregular warfare of a vast and difficult landscape where supply lines stretch to breaking point and the enemy retreats and reforms and attacks from unexpected directions. Then comes the political catastrophe. In November 1920, Greece holds elections. Venizelos, the architect of the entire Asia Minor campaign, the man whose diplomatic skill made the landing possible, the man whose relationships with Lloyd George and Clemenceau gave Greece its allied backing, loses. He loses badly. The Greek electorate, exhausted by years of war, votes him out of office. King Constantine, who had kept Greece neutral and pro-German during the First World War, and whose return the Allied powers have explicitly warned against, comes back to the throne. Britain withdraws its support. France begins negotiating separately with Kemal. The United States, never fully committed, steps back further. Greece is now fighting a war in Asia Minor that it originally launched with Allied authorization and Allied support, and that Allied support has evaporated because of a domestic election result. The Greek government in Athens, now controlled by Constantine's supporters, faces a choice: withdraw from Asia Minor, which would mean abandoning the Greek populations of Anatolia to whatever Kemal's nationalist movement intends for them, or press forward, without Allied support, without Allied supplies, without the diplomatic framework that made the campaign legitimate in the first place. They choose to press forward. In the spring of 1921, the Greek army launches a major offensive into central Anatolia. The commander is General Anastasios Papoulas, a professional soldier who has spent his career in the Greek military, who served in the Balkan Wars, who understands the logistical and tactical realities of the campaign with a precision that the politicians in Athens directing strategy from a distance do not share. Papoulas is not a flamboyant commander. He does not make speeches. He reads maps and supply reports and casualty figures, and he understands, with a clarity he cannot fully communicate to his superiors, that what is being asked of his army is at the outer edge of what is possible. His army pushes east anyway. Through June and July of 1921, Greek forces advance deeper into Anatolia than any Greek army has gone in modern history. They fight battles at Kütahya and Eskişehir that push Kemal's forces back and open the road toward Ankara. The Greek army captures Eskişehir on July 17, 1921. They capture Afyonkarahisar. The momentum feels unstoppable. In Athens, the government sees Ankara on the map and makes a decision: push further, take the capital, end the war. Papoulas knows the risks. His supply lines already stretch hundreds of miles back to the Aegean coast. His men have been fighting continuously for weeks in the brutal summer heat of the Anatolian plateau. Scorching days above 30 degrees, followed by freezing nights and almost no water across terrain that offers almost no natural cover. His horses and mules, the backbone of logistics in this campaign, are exhausted. His ammunition reserves are being consumed faster than they can be replenished. He pushes anyway, because his orders tell him to, and because Ankara is there, within reach, and the men who give orders always find it difficult to look at a map and not reach for what appears to be within their grasp. August 23, 1921. The Battle of Sakarya begins. The Sakarya River runs roughly north to south across the Anatolian plateau, approximately 80 kilometers west of Ankara. It is the last major geographical obstacle between the Greek army and the Turkish capital. Kemal has decided to make his stand here. He has spent the weeks since the fall of Eskişehir pulling his forces back, reorganizing, fortifying the eastern bank of the river, buying time with every kilometer of retreat. The decision to fight at the Sakarya rather than abandon Ankara is not obvious. Some of Kemal's officers argue for further retreat, drawing the Greeks deeper into Anatolia, stretching their supply lines to the point of collapse before turning to fight. Kemal overrules them. He will fight at the Sakarya. He will hold Ankara. He understands something that the Greek army's momentum is obscuring from the politicians in Athens, that an army fighting for its capital, fighting for the survival of its government, fights differently than an army fighting for a line on a map. He takes personal command of all Turkish forces. He is not a man who delegates the decisive moments. The Greek army crosses the Sakarya on August 24th, and the fighting begins. It is unlike anything the Greek soldiers have experienced in this campaign. The terrain on the eastern bank is brutal. A series of ridges and valleys running perpendicular to the Greek line of advance. Each one a natural defensive position that has to be taken by frontal assault before the next one can even be approached. The Turkish defenders are fighting with a desperation that has a specific source. Behind them is their capital, their government, the entire political project that Kemal has spent 2 years building in the Anatolian interior. The Greeks attack. They take ridge lines at enormous cost. The Turks counterattack and retake them. The Greeks attack again. The battle churns through the same ground repeatedly, consuming men and ammunition and the physical reserves of soldiers who have already been fighting for weeks in brutal summer heat. Papulas watches his casualty reports and his supply figures simultaneously. The two sets of numbers are moving in directions that tell him the same thing. His army is bleeding faster than it can be replaced. His supplies are running out faster than they can be replenished. The arithmetic of the battle is turning against him, even as his men continue to advance, continue to take ground, continue to push the Turks backward toward Ankara. On the Turkish side, Kemal is watching the same battle with different mathematics. His forces are also taking catastrophic casualties. His supply lines, running through the Anatolian interior to the eastern provinces, are functioning, barely but functioning. He has a geographic advantage the Greeks cannot overcome. Every kilometer of Turkish retreat shortens Turkish supply lines and lengthens Greek ones. Every day of continued fighting is a day that the arithmetic moves further in his favor. He holds. For 22 days, the Battle of Sakarya grinds on, the longest continuous battle in the entire Greco-Turkish war. Greek forces, at their furthest advance, reach points from which, on a clear day, the outline of Ankara is visible on the horizon, the capital of Kemal's nationalist movement, the city whose fall would end the war. They cannot take it. On September 13th, 1921, Papulas orders the withdrawal. His army has fought itself to a standstill. His ammunition is critically low. His men are exhausted beyond the point that further offensive action is possible. The Sakarya River, which the Greek army crossed with such momentum 3 weeks earlier, is crossed again, this time going west. The retreat is orderly. The Greek army has not been routed. It has not collapsed. It withdraws in formation, maintaining its cohesion, pulling back to defensive lines that can be held while the army rests and resupplies. But the moment is gone. In the weeks after the Battle of Sakarya, the strategic reality of the campaign becomes impossible to ignore, even in Athens. The army needs reinforcements it is not going to receive. It needs allied support that has been withdrawn. It needs a political framework that collapsed with Venizelos's election defeat. What it has instead is a defensive line stretched across hundreds of miles of Anatolian plateau, held by men who have been fighting for 2 years, supplied through logistics that strain with every passing month. Papulas submits his assessment to Athens in the months after Sakarya. The assessment is professional and precise and deeply uncomfortable. The army cannot advance further without reinforcements and resupply that the current government cannot provide. Holding the current lines indefinitely is possible, but strategically pointless. It consumes the army without achieving any objective. The only alternatives are a negotiated settlement or a planned withdrawal to defensible positions closer to the coast. Athens does not want to hear this. The politicians who ordered the advance to Ankara cannot now order the retreat without admitting that the campaign has failed. King Constantine cannot abandon the Greek populations of Asia Minor without abandoning the entire rationale for his return to the throne. The army stays on its lines and waits and grows weaker with every passing month, while Kemal's forces grow stronger. Paulus, understanding what is coming, resigns his command in May 1922. He is replaced by General Georgios Hatzianestis. The appointment is one of the most baffling command decisions in the history of modern Greek military leadership, and not merely because of the strategic situation he inherits. Hatzianestis is suffering from severe mental illness. He is known among Greek officers as the Glass General because he believes his legs are made of glass and will shatter if he moves. He commands the Greek army of Asia Minor from a bed in Smyrna, hundreds of miles from the front lines, during the most critical weeks of the entire campaign. The army that needs decisive and present leadership in the summer of 1922 has a commander who cannot walk. On August 26, 1922, Mustafa Kemal launches the Great Offensive. The Turkish attack hits the Greek lines at Afyonkarahisar with overwhelming force. 4 Turkish divisions strike a single point in the Greek defensive line, concentrating power that the spread-thin Greek forces cannot absorb. The line breaks within hours. Not because the Greek soldiers are cowards. The accounts of the fighting from both sides consistently acknowledge the quality of the Greek infantry. The line breaks because it is too long, held by too few men with too little ammunition, commanded from a bed in Smyrna by a general who believes his legs are made of glass. Once the line breaks, the retreat becomes the route that Paulus had warned against. Greek units that hold their positions are outflanked. Units that withdraw do so faster than coordination allows. The collapse spreads along the line with a speed that even the Turkish commanders find difficult to manage. They are advancing faster than their own supply lines can keep pace with. General Nikolaos Trikoupis, commanding Greek forces in the north, receives orders so confused and contradictory in the chaos of the collapse that he does not know the full extent of the disaster unfolding around him. What he does not know, what no one has been able to communicate to him because the communications infrastructure has completely collapsed, is that the government in Athens has appointed him commander-in-chief of the entire Asia Minor army to replace Hatzianestis. The promotion exists on paper in Athens. It has never reached Trikoupis. He attempts to lead his forces out of the encirclement. He fails. On September 2nd, 1922, Trikoupis is captured by Turkish forces. He is brought before Kemal, who receives him with the formal courtesy that commanders extend to captured enemies of quality. Kemal tells him directly that he fought well, and then Trikoupis learns 2 things simultaneously: that he has been surrounded for 3 days without knowing it, and that for those same 3 days he was technically the commander-in-chief of the entire Greek army in Asia Minor. He learned of his own promotion from the man who defeated him. He has nothing to say. Behind the collapsing front, the Greek civilian population of Western Anatolia is already moving toward the coast, toward Smyrna, toward the sea, the same direction the Greek army is moving, the same direction that ends on the waterfront of a burning city with 300,000 people trapped between fire and the sea. The Allied warships in the harbor stand by in the first terrible days of the fire, under orders not to intervene. It is only through the extraordinary individual actions of Asa Jennings, the YMCA volunteer whose story was told in the previous video on this channel, and the eventual protection of American destroyers that a massive evacuation is organized and hundreds of thousands of people are brought off that waterfront alive. But in those first days, they do nothing. Right now, somewhere on YouTube, the same three stories are being told for the 10,000th time. This wasn't one of them. If you'd rather discover what's been buried than hear what's been polished to death, subscribe to this channel. There's plenty more where this came from. And if this story deserved to be told, hit that like button. It takes 1 second. The fall of the Greek position in Asia Minor in August and September 1922 was not a surprise to everyone. Papoulas had seen it coming, and said so in writing. The Allied intelligence services had watched Kemal's army reorganize and re-equip through the winter and spring of 1922, and their reports were available to the Greek government. Military observers attached to the Greek army had filed assessments of the defensive line's vulnerabilities that matched almost precisely what the Turkish offensive exploited. The catastrophe was not unforeseeable. It was foreseen, and the decisions that made it inevitable were made anyway, by politicians who could not accept the consequences of admitting failure, by a king whose return to the throne had cost Greece its allied support, by a government that appointed a man who believed his legs were made of glass to command an army on the edge of collapse. The Battle of Sakarya was the turning point that nobody in Athens chose to recognize as a turning point. The Greek army came within reach of ending the war on Greek terms in the summer of 1921. When it could not, the logical consequence was to reassess, to recognize that the campaign had reached the limit of what was achievable with the resources available and the diplomatic support that had been lost, and to find the best available exit. Instead, Athens waited. And while Athens waited, Kemal built the army that would destroy everything the Greek campaign had achieved in 3 weeks in August 1922. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed in July 1923, formalized what the Great Offensive had decided on the battlefield. Greece received nothing of what had been promised at Paris in 1919. The Greek populations of Asia Minor, communities that had been there for 3,000 years, were expelled in the largest compulsory population exchange in history. 1.5 million people, gone in months. The Megali idea, the great dream of uniting all Greek populations of the Eastern Mediterranean that had driven Greek foreign policy for a century, died on the Anatolian plateau between August and September 1922. It died at the Sakarya River in the summer of 1921, when the Greek army stood within reach of Ankara and could not take it, and then kept fighting anyway for another year, consuming itself on defensive lines that could not be held forever, waiting for a reinforcement and a political solution that never came. Anastasios Papoulas survived the war. He returned to Greece and eventually became one of the most vocal critics of the monarchy that had sent his army into an unwinnable strategic situation. He participated in the political turbulence of the 1920s that followed the Asia Minor catastrophe, a turbulence that included coups, counter-coups, the trial and execution of the 6 officials held responsible for the defeat, and the eventual abolition of the monarchy. The men executed in the trial of the 6, the political and military figures scapegoated for the Asia Minor catastrophe, died for decisions that were made above them, around them, and sometimes despite them. The real decisions that sealed Greece's fate in Asia Minor were made earlier in Athens, in the election of November 1920 that returned King Constantine and ended Allied support, and in the months after Sakarya, when the government chose to stay on lines, it could not hold, rather than seek the best available exit from a campaign that had already reached its limit. And in the spring of 1922, when they appointed a man who commanded from a bed because he believed his own legs would shatter beneath him. Papulas knew this. He said so in his resignation and in everything he wrote afterward. He was a professional soldier who understood that armies have limits, that supply lines have limits, that the momentum of an offensive cannot be sustained indefinitely, and that the moment to make peace is the moment when you still have something worth trading. Greece had that moment in September 1921, after Sakarya, when the army had shown that it could fight to the Anatolian plateau but could not hold Ankara, and when Kemal had shown that he could not be dislodged from his capital but had not yet rebuilt the force that would destroy the Greek army a year later. A negotiated settlement at that moment, on terms that acknowledged the military reality on the ground, would have been painful and incomplete. It would not have given Greece everything that Venizelos had negotiated at Paris. But Smyrna would not have burned. In the cities of Greece today, in Athens, in Thessaloniki, in every place where the Asia Minor refugees built new lives after 1922, the memory of what was lost is still present. In the neighborhoods named after the cities left behind, in the family recipes that came from kitchens in Smyrna and Bursa and Pontus, in the churches that were built by refugee communities replicating the churches they had been driven from, in the names given to children generation after generation, names that keep a connection alive to a world that no longer exists on any map. The Greek army stood within reach of Ankara in the summer of 1921. The decision that was made in the weeks after the Battle of Sakarya to stay, to wait, to hope was not made by the soldiers on the Anatolian plateau. It was made by politicians in Athens who could not accept what the map was telling them. Those soldiers paid for that decision, and so did every Greek family in Asia Minor who had nothing to do with it. The story of how Greece came so close and lost so much is not in the textbooks. It is not in the popular histories. It exists in the military archives, in the memoirs of the commanders, in the after-action reports of an army that did what was asked of it and was handed an impossible strategic situation by the people above it. It exists. It always did. The story just needed someone to tell it. Someone watching this right now is going to tell this story to their kids someday. They'll know it because they found this video. That like button is how the next person finds it. The subscribe button is how you make sure you're there for the next one. Where are you watching from? If your family has roots in Asia Minor, if your grandparents or great-grandparents lived through what this video describes, tell us in the comments. We read everything. Thank you for being part of this story in this century. The soldiers of the Greek army of Asia Minor made their history in theirs. You are carrying it into ours.